Hey guys, today we're going to go over how to shoot the moon. It's a rather simple thing, but a lot of people struggle doing it. Pardon my little tuft of hair here is from my headset wearing that. But anyways, what we're going to do is we're going to cover exactly what kind of camera, what kind of lenses, and how to actually go about that with your settings. So it's very, very simple to do. So right here, I have my Pentax K5 IIS. It is a relatively inexpensive camera nowadays. Brand new, they ran about $1,000. But you can pick one of these up for about $500 now. So what I have mounted on here is an all-manual Tamron SP 6-300mm lens. So fully zoomed out. It's about that big. It's heavier than sin. It's all metal. This lens is easily 30 years old, and it is definitely stood up to the test of time. So basically, this is the kind of camera that you're going to want, or a really, really, really good super zoom point and shoot. But what you're going to do is you're going to want to obviously make sure you have your memory card in the camera, turn it on. I don't have the memory card in here right now. But you're going to be using all manual settings. So the moon, especially a full moon, is actually very, very bright. And what you need to do is that you need to make sure that you have the proper settings in your camera in order to be able to properly capture that. So the pictures that you're going to see later on in this video were captured on this camera earlier tonight. And it's really an easy thing to do. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that your mode dial is set to manual. You also want to make sure that you are set to ISO 100. If you can't get down to ISO 100, at least ISO 200. I would not go any higher than that. You would want a zoom lens like this. This guy ran me about 50 bucks. I got it for a pretty good deal. They run anywhere from 50 to 100 right now. It is an Adapt-All 2 system, so you can get the adapters for any camera brand, Canon, Nikon, anybody like that. It's a really, really nice lens. It's not going to be as nice as some of the multi-$1,000 lenses that are out there, obviously, but it gets the job done. So with this guy here, you want to make sure that you have the ability on your camera to shoot with an aperture ring, and that's another big thing. If you haven't watched my How to Shoot with Manual Lenses on a Pentax DSLR video, I highly recommend you watch that. But you need to make sure that your camera is set up to actually shoot from an actual aperture ring, as most lenses nowadays do not have it. So you want to make sure it's set to about f8, and then you also want to make sure that your shutter speed is set to about 1/160th to 1/180th of a second. Since I was shooting on ISO 80 and f8, I chose 1/160th of a second. I did do a 12-second timer. You can set that in the back, or if you have an infrared remote, you can use that as well. You want to make sure that you get as little camera shake as possible. Now, the nice thing about Pentax lenses and Pentax cameras in general is the fact that they are image stabilized in the body directly. So it doesn't matter what lens I have on this camera. I don't have to spend fancy amounts of money to get a image stabilized lens. All lenses, regardless of how old they are stabilized on my camera up to 4 stops. So if you don't have a stabilized lens, you really, really, really have to be careful with camera shake at this point. But basically, that's going to be the basics you need. So ISO 80 to 100, 200 at the most, anywhere between f11 and f8. You want to make sure that you have about 1/160th to 1/180th, maybe 1/200th of a second in the shutter speed range. And you want to make sure that you use some kind of remote or a remote timer feature. So that's going to be your basic camera settings there. Now, the next thing that you're going to absolutely have to have is a nice tripod. So this one here is a Dolica Proline. It's got a ball head joint on the top here, which just gives you a lot more control in regards to how you can manipulate and move your camera. Highly recommend getting something with a ball head, not a 3-way. Those are mainly used more for video than they are for actual photography. So this guy here is not super huge, but he gets the job done. They'll run you about 50 bucks nowadays. I think I picked this guy up back in 2012 for about 100, 120 at a camera store in Gatlinburg. So it's not a Manfrotto by any means, but it gets the job done and it's stable enough, especially when there's no wind outgoing, to move my camera. So with those settings, basically all you have to do is just point it at the moon. You do want to make sure that your metering is correct. So in this instance here, you want to make sure that you're set to center weighted or spot metering. You don't want to use the multi-segment metering, but it's not really going to make too big of a difference. I prefer to use the spot just because I'm going to be using my center focus point, which is selected right here. Center focus is very, very key. You can do center weighted with the focusing as well if you really wanted to, or the auto setting. But I recommend doing the center because you want to line up that moon right dead center. That's generally where the sharpest part of the lens is going to be, especially when it's stopped down to like f8, f11. Those are generally the sweet spots in most lenses. So you want to make sure that you're using that center focus point to really nail focus for a nice, clear, crisp shot. So that's really all there is to it. Just get out there, point your camera at the moon with these settings. You may have to tweak them a little bit depending on if you're shooting full frame or crop. But I highly recommend that you just get out there and actually do it. See what looks best. Look at the picture reviews. Now, if you're shooting RAW, which I highly, highly recommend that you shoot RAW, it's going to look a little odd. They're not going to be processed out of the camera, so you're going to have to do that, which we're going to explain in the next part of the video. But yeah, you definitely want to make sure that you're shooting RAW for this because you are going to need to tweak the photos to get them to the results that you expect to see. Camera sensors, unfortunately, are limited, no matter how expensive your camera is. So it's going to make it very difficult to get what your natural eye is going to see without tweaking some things. So again, shoot in RAW. Make sure that you're using the center focus point, center weighted, or the center metering, sorry. And then you want to make sure that you're using at least a 300 millimeter. That's on the very, very bottom end that you can really get away with. I've seen people do it with 200, but you're not going to be able to really zoom in and get a nice, good shot. Especially with the amount of cropping that we're going to have to do. So at least a 300, preferably a 500 to 600 millimeter, like the Sigma 600 Sport or Contemporary. Those would be good lenses for this, or even the Tamron version. So I would highly recommend, if you can, pick one of those up. But this guy's obviously the best bang for the buck that you can get for the size. So. Alright, let's move on to the next part of the video, and we'll show you how to actually take these photos that you just took and make them look amazing. Thank you. Alright, so now that we've gone out and shot the moon, we're going to need to come back in and take our memory card here, and we're going to need to take a card reader if you don't have one built in. We've got a couple different ones. This is the one I use in my camera. This is just an extra one for demonstration. But basically, you're going to take a USB card reader and plug it into your computer, or if you have one built in, that works as well. So generally when that happens, what you're going to want to do is open up Lightroom. And when you do that, you'll have the option to import your images from the camera. So we're going to make sure that we're in the library and not over here in the develop module. Alright, and then we come down here to where it says import. Now this is where you would select your disk. So in this case here, I will plug in my card reader. Alrighty. Sorry about that. I had to move my headphone around a little bit. So anyways, so once we have it in, you can see here that we have our K5IIS memory card here. And you just want to make sure that you're selecting all your new photos. So it's very simple. If you haven't watched, I have a tutorial on Lightroom as well on how to import. Basically, you would want to come in and put your keywords, where you want to put the pictures, and then just hit import. Since I already have these in here, I don't need to do that. So once we're in our Lightroom here, you can see with a 300 millimeter lens, unfortunately, you're not going to get very close. This was before I actually got to focus it, so I'll go where I can actually focus. So zoomed in 1:1, which is about what I zoom into. You can see it's not all that sharp just yet because it is a RAW file. RAW files aren't edited in any way, shape, or form from the camera, unlike a JPEG, which comes edited out of the camera with your settings. So if you had a white balance selected, or you had some sort of sharpening filter selected, or anything like that with JPEG, it would be completed in camera and then exported out to that JPEG, and that's your final result. So don't get turned off by the fact that you have to edit an image, because your camera is already editing almost every single image that you take a picture of with JPEG based on the various settings that you have. With RAW, it's just leaving it up to you to edit instead of leaving it up to your camera. And you do have some control over the camera settings in regards to what you can and can't edit, as far as, you know, before taking the shot. Your white balance, your ISO, things like that are obviously all going to be set ahead of time. You can set different filters if you have a camera that does that, like sepia, black and white, inverse, things of that nature. You can also set the vibrance, different saturation levels, just like you would be able to in Lightroom. So once we're in here, what we need to do is come over here to our develop module. and we're going to just basically use this picture here. So the first thing that we want to do is do the crop overlay. So this will allow us to crop the image in here nice and tight. Again, with a 300mm lens, you're not going to get a lot of room to play with, unfortunately. So it is going to make a somewhat smaller file depending on your camera. It's obviously not going to be full screen with black. If you can get a foreground shot with the moon, that's even better. But unfortunately, I'm taking this picture out of my backyard, so there's absolutely nothing that I can be getting in the foreground. So once we've done that, you just hit enter, and it'll zoom in nice and close for you. So this is now cropped all the way. We can just hit fit here. And then, oh geez, these flies, I swear, it needs to get cold fast. You can come over here to your white balance, you can choose auto, it doesn't really matter. We're going to convert it to black and white over here. So once it's converted to black and white, we can click auto, see where it sets it, and that's quite a bit much. So we're going to dial that back a bit so we get about the brightness of what we see with our naked eye. Now, with a camera, unfortunately, the sensors are very limited in regards to our human eye, so they can't quite capture the same level of clarity, the same details that our eyes can, but with some tweaking we can get that kind of close. So if you mess with the contrast slider here, you'll notice that if you go too much, it's going to get really bright, and if you go too dark, it's going to get really flat and dull. So you kind of want a good medium mid-ground there where you can still see the details of the trenches and everything there, the valleys, while not blowing this out to kind of like a gray. The highlights here, you don't want to really mess with that too much. You might want to tweak it just a little bit just to kind of keep the brightness where it needs to be. For our shadows, you're probably going to want to bring those down, honestly, to bring out some more detail in those valleys. And then with the whites, we want to hold the Alt key down. We want to drag until we start to see a blip of white there, and then go back just until you don't see it anymore. And that gives you your white point there. So that might still be a bit too bright for my liking, but we'll tweak that here in a minute. With the blacks, obviously, you can control quite a bit here. So I wouldn't go past, if you notice the edge here of the moon, I wouldn't go to where you start taking detail away. So just to about right there to bring some of that black in there. Clarity, you can mess with that if you want to. If you want to really make it pop, I guess, especially with it being black and white, you can do something like this. That might be a bit overkill. Might drag that back a little bit just to give it a little bit more definition and separation between the valleys and the high points here. So once we come down here, you've got your sharpening. So if you notice here, if we sharpen it up, it gets really noisy. If we don't, it stays kind of blah. So we can sharpen it right up to about 89 here. Now it's going to be really noisy still, but you have this noise reduction filter setting here. So you can kind of drag that around, play with it. Just move that around a little bit until you get something that you're satisfied with. So I try not to use the noise reduction too much, because if you do, you notice it starts to come out like a painting instead of having actual noise in it. And this isn't looking too terrible, actually. And then, of course, you got your distortion. We're not going to mess with that. But I'm using an all-manual lens, so unfortunately, it doesn't really import any of my camera settings. The most it's going to give you is my shutter speed and my ISO. But I can tell you right now that I was using f8 for my aperture setting, just because the moon is so bright when it's full. And then at the same time I was using the 12-second shutter because my infrared remote, somewhere around here, I don't know where it ran off to. Basically, you want as little shake as possible. Because if you have any kind of camera shake whatsoever, you're going to just destroy the sharpness of your photos. And even these aren't like super duper sharp. You can take this a whole step further and go into photo stacking, as they call it, which is why I did take so many shots. But I can actually import these settings that I used over to a couple different of these images using the previous button, and that will allow me to get all the same edits to them so that they're going to be identical, import them into something like Registack 6, and then be able to photo stack them to get super sharp, super clear images. I'm not quite going to that detail. I've done it in the past, but honestly, I'm overshooting the moon, and I keep getting sucked back into it every time there's a new super something, or a new eclipse, or a new this, or a new that, because I get suckered into it, wanting to take photos. So, anywho, I'm just doing single exposure right now. So we can look at the before. So the before, it's very bland, it's very blah, it's not very bright, and that's because our camera sensor with the settings that I was using, I purposely underexposed to try to capture some more of that detail in the shadows, um, and it doesn't have any kind of editing whatsoever done to it. Once it's edited, it's nice and bright, just as our human eye would see it. You see that nice contrast in between the valleys and the high points. You can see the nice crisp details on the edge there with the craters. So it gives you a lot. You can tweak the settings, play around with it a little bit, but this is all stuff that your camera is already doing anyways with the JPEG files. You're just able to have a lot more control over what's going on. You're able to tweak things a little farther than your camera might be able to get the results that you want. So just play around with it, guys. It's very simple to do. And of course, you can come up here to File, Export, and then you can export it out with, watermark, put it in subfolders, name it, however you want to do it. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed on how to do the moonshots here. Again, there's a lot more complex stuff that you can go into with it, such as photo stacking, things of that nature. But right now, we're just doing a very basic shot. You can do this with pretty much any somewhat telephoto zoom lens, and that's again all covered in the first half of this video, where I actually go through and explain what lenses to use and then take you through how to set up everything. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.